Hello everybody, I have a game for you in the Road to 2100 series against Ashtiana 1947 from New Zealand. She opens up with e4 and we play d6, just controlling the center and opening our bishop. She takes the full center and we just develop our piece, hitting the pawn. Now she plays bishop c4. This does not defend the pawn. I asked her after the game if she did this on purpose, and she said she did not. She was streaming and she was like singing karaoke or whatever, and just wasn't paying attention. Auto moved and just lost the pawn on move 3. But it's still not as obvious as it may seem. It's still White can put up quite a fight here, believe it or not. So White just develops a piece and looks at the center. There's lots of different ways to play this position as Black. I recommend g6, but I did not play that. I went for a different approach. I went for d5, hitting the bishop and just putting my pawn one more square forward. It leads to different types of games. So now he retreats. She retreats the bishop backwards, which is a little weird because I can always just shut it down in various ways. And so I want to close my pawn chain and develop and castle. But before I close my pawn chain, I just want to bring out my bishop. So I figure let's create a pin while we're at it. You can go to f5, that's also fine. So now he asks my bishop what I want to do. Regardless of what you do, it's a fine decision because your bishop will be outside the pawn chain and you can just continue. So I take the knight and he takes with the queen. Okay, fine. Nothing crazy's happened. We want to continue with our plan. The only logical move would be e6, solidifying our structure and opening up our bishop so that we can castle. White decides just to castle. Typical 1950 move, right? Can't be bad. So what do we want to do as Black? Well, we can get our pieces out. Maybe we can move the c-pawn, but let's go for the pieces, right? So I decide bishop d6 looks like the most active square for the bishop. This doesn't make any sense because it gets kicked. So we go here. He develops a knight, challenges our knight. Now we don't want to we don't want to let him take, and we don't want to just hang the pawn. I mean, you could move the piece back, and then his knight's a little awkward. Maybe he'll play c4 to break out. But I decide let's not waste time. Let's take his piece, which will force him to recapture, and then I'll get the move back, and then I get to do what I want. So now I have this knight that's undeveloped. I have the king that's potentially can castle, and I have this c-pawn that can move. So I choose to castle. Simple, logical move. Now pushing the c-pawn feels even safer because the diagonal won't lead to my king. Not that it really mattered. Okay, White solidifies their pawn structure. And so how do you convert this position as Black against 2000? So right now I'm up this e-pawn. This is what I have on the board. That's my advantage. But how do I win the game? It's not so obvious. White's position is completely defended and solid. So what do? Well, we have a queen and a knight, both undeveloped. We choose queen f6. We just bring it out. Queen h4 is a better square, but I chose to go for queen f6. I figured I'm up a pawn. You don't want to create too many sets of doubled pawns when you're up a pawn because then it may be hard to queen in the future. But I thought if I just have one set, and it's connected to my extra e pawn, I'll still be able to queen, so the structure shouldn't matter. He avoids the trade, although I think taking is the same. And so he just gets away and says, okay, I'm down a pawn. He doesn't want to trade queens. So now my queen is on a nice spot. So it's a good square. So now I have my knight and my c pawn potentially to move. Maybe yeah. So I probably developing the knight makes the most sense, especially with this alignment. If you do want to play c5, you definitely want to recapture with the knight, not the bishop. So I was a little hasty in this decision. Also, this pawn, it's possible to just leave it on the c6 square. You don't have a light square bishop, so you can just use these pawns as mini bishops, mini light square bishops to like make up for it, and your dark square bishop will control everything in between. Yeah, so I wanted to play for c5, a more aggressive approach. But yeah, if I'm going to do that, I think knight d7 was smarter, but I went c5 immediately. He took, she took, I mean. I took back. And now bishop e3. So she's just improving her bishop, which wasn't looking at anything, and challenging my bishop. And saying, if you take my bishop, maybe I'll open up my rook against your queen. Okay, it's a move. So we could take. We could maybe develop our knight and defend this way. That looks interesting. Yeah, I kind of like that actually. b6 is a move to maybe strengthen the center if they capture. Those are all possibilities. But I took. And why did I take? Well, I'm up a pawn. So if I take this bishop and they take with the queen, well then his rook's not staring at my queen, so I don't have to do anything with my queen. I can just develop my knight, and I have two pawns in the center where they have none, and I'm up a pawn. That should be good for me. If he takes with the pawn, yes, he's staring at my queen, but this relinquishes control over the g3 square completely now that he moved h3. So all these dark squares are going to be super weak in his position. So once he takes, which he actually does take this way, thinking she's activating her rook, I just sneak my queen into this little cubby hole on e5, which I saw beforehand, and now this pawn defends my queen from his rooks. So otherwise my queen would be poorly placed, but because there's a pawn here, it's wonderfully placed, wonderfully centralized, looking at a ton of squares, and really controlling the center, and cannot be kicked by a pawn, so it's on a lovely outpost. Interesting idea. Maybe to fix the structure would be queen up, but we're not even forced to take. We can just develop the knight to defend. Anyway, white goes bishop c2, saying, I'm blunted on this diagonal. Let me move it. Come to the mate in one threat. Maybe black won't see. But of course I saw, and we hit her with g6, which of course blunts the diagonal. And you don't really care about the dark squares because they don't have a dark square bishop, they don't have a knight, so their queen can't coordinate with anything on the dark squares. So your king is perfectly safe, and you have good control over the center. You're up one pawn, and they have an isolated pawn. These are all big advantage. These all add up to a big advantage. Okay, so she activates her rook along the fourth rank and prepares to double. She's trying to keep her pieces as active as possible. It's the best strategy you can employ. So I can't really argue about that. And now I just develop my knight. You could develop it to c6, you know, it's also a good square. But I decided to go to d6 just to look at the f6 square. Just in case he decides to like triple and plant, like he wants to plant a rook here for some reason. I don't know. Sacrifices with an h pawn. Who knows? I just said, you know what, let's just keep this here. It looks at some interesting squares, touches f6, can't be bad. So I just put it here. And then it also keeps the c file open because I did want to do a rook lift like this. I wanted to move my rooks through c8 to c4 so that I can challenge his rooks along his own ranks. I thought that was a cool idea. And if the knight's on c6, it's kind of in the way, so. Okay, so she doubles because what else? You know, it looks like the most logical move. The thing is, if I can cover these two squares that are in red, then white has nothing to do, right? They have no plan if I cover these squares. So the best way to do that is to play f5. And if she tried something like, she obviously can't play e4 because you just take. Well, you can take this way so you don't lose your knight. If she plays g4, you don't have to do anything, and if she takes, you can always recapture and move your king, and your king is safe. So f5 is a good move. I was looking for, like, I wanted to play f5, but I was looking for an even better time to do it. I didn't think it was necessary here, so I just went a different route. But I did want to play f5. I just wanted to do it later. I don't even remember if I ever got around to it, but it was always something I wanted to play. So I move my knight to c5, improving the knight and hitting the queen at the same time. And it does give up control over the f6 square, but let's say he has a rook in here right now. Sacking it doesn't do anything. So like the f6 square doesn't need guarding right at this moment. It's safe. And this knight can even interpose and create some, you know, nasty threats. So, but at the moment it hits the queen, forcing this to get off this diagonal. So it's not even coordinating with the bishop anymore. So it's just a disruptive move with good possibilities. So she moves the queen, and that removes the battery and puts the queen into a more passive position. So can't hurt. I decide this rook's doing nothing. It's the only piece that's doing nothing. At least this rook is on defensive duty. It has a job. So let's do something with the a rook. It makes the most sense. So rook to c8, the only semi-open file we have in the position. So she decides to rook lift, rook f3, maybe some aggressive intentions. Also, it protects the pawn. It looks just like a, you know, a forward solidifying move. Makes sense. Again, f5 at any of these points makes sense. Of course, you have to follow it up correctly and not lose to things like g4. But it's a move. Of course, you don't have to do that. There's safer routes. For example, I just play a6, and it might look random, but in this position, my queen is, let's just say, on its most active square, right? It can't really do anything because it's kind of shut down. So this is like its most centralized active square. The knight, it's on a good square. Maybe it can go somewhere else in the future. This guy has to defend, and this guy, I mean, maybe you can go here in a couple turns, but like your pieces are pretty good. It's hard to improve them much further. So you can improve your king. King g7 makes sense. It's slower, but it makes a lot of sense. It's logical, right? They can't attack it or harass it. It overall consolidates these squares. So I think it's just a nice move. But I play a6 so that his queen never has access to this, right? Because once it comes in here, it can target stuff, but that's not the real reason. The reason is because I want to play b5. I can't play b5 because it hangs, so I play a6 first. Now, why do I want to play b5? I want to play b5 to create this double structure, pawn structure, so I could put a rook there, and when he takes, I can take back with a pawn, keeping this pawn chain. So now she wants to just attack me because she has no other plan, right? She can't play on the queen side because she'll lose, because I have a rook staring at her c-pawn and the queen, so you can't move anything. So she goes for the king side attack, which makes sense. h4, h5 is what she wants, and she wants to break this down. Again, at all points, f5. But instead, I go knight d7. It may look a little weird, but I told you my plan is to put a rook on c4. The knight's in the way. If you jump the knight in, which may look desirable, he's going to take with his bishop. You have to take with your pawn. Maybe something like queen c2, attacking that white central pawn. Maybe there f5 to defend. I don't know. It seemed weird. Also, I just didn't want to trade the knight for the bishop there. So now she goes rook to h3, which I guess supports h5. Yeah, I guess she wants to just go h5 and get some h-file pressure. But I just continue with my plan b5. I want to put a rook here and just challenge her this way, and then take her pieces and go to an endgame up a pawn. So she pushes and continues with her plan, because what else does white have to do in this position? And this was... So I've been thinking about f5 in the game a lot, but I kept making other moves because I didn't deem it necessary. Because it didn't seem like she can actually do anything. Even if I didn't play f5, it seemed like there was no real attack, so why bother? Okay, so she played at h5, and now I said, okay, now we have the opportunity to push past, and that's a big important concept in chess. And that's why usually you wait for your opponent to be the one to push, so you can oftentimes push past them. So she pushes, and now I have this one opportunity to push past, right? Keeping the h-file closed with tempo on the rook. The rook has to move. Or does it? So she says the rook does not have to move, because if you take the rook, checkmate in one. But this gives me another beautiful opportunity to now play the move at the perfect time when I think it's the most beautiful. f5 here, blocking the diagonal, but without the possibility of them to ever challenge me with a pawn, because all of this comes with tempo, and I can get in g4 if I want, so they'll never have g4. And so my king is fully protected with this wall of pawns that's forward. It's like an inferno wall of flame, right, that protects you, but it's offensive. So now I block the diagonal, I increase the scope of my rook, I increase the possibility of lateral protection from my own rooks. I also cut off this battery. I stop the pressure from his rook down the f-file, and it's with tempo, has to go. Or does it? Once again, white's like, I don't care. I'm not moving. First, I do the queen intermezzo. Now I'm doing the rook intermezzo because it's pinned. But at the end of the day, white is creating more problems for themselves. They're tangling themselves further and further because these moves they're making, they're cute, but they don't. They're too like one turn attacky. Like I'm gonna attack the queen type moves. So like, okay, you do this, you pin the pawn and attack it, but okay, what's the most common response that 100 would do? They just defend it, right? So that's what I do. h6, and now this stops the pawn in its tracks, solidifies this structure. It's the most solid thing you're ever gonna see, and there's no way, even though it looks like my king is airy, there's no way to get to my king. These pawns are a fortress, impenetrable, and these rooks are terribly misplaced. Okay, so that's why it's -4. So technically, the rook isn't hanging because the pin's on, but you really can't leave it there. You should be moving it, but whatever. So she moves it, but she doesn't move it all the way back, which means that these rooks are in very weird positions. A little too close to my army, probably not good. So what do? King h8. I know there are other moves I want to make, right? Maybe with the rook, maybe with the knight. But we want to get this pin out of the way. Just get it out of the way. Now we can push our pawns, and there's always threats. Okay. Rook g4. These moves are hilarious. And they're always like, it's just cute move after cute move after cute move. Like she's solving puzzles, but I mean, they're really cool moves that she's seeing super quickly, but they just don't work unless I fall for them. So like if I fall for this rook, she wants to checkmate me again. But okay, so I'm not gonna take the rook, right? Instead, I'm gonna go knight c4, knight c5 for the sole reason because I did want to put my rook here, right? But now I see this tactical opportunity. I can't take the rook because of this battery. But now if I disrupt the battery with tempo, hitting the queen, then I can pick up the rook, right? Simple. But wait, it's not so simple. She finds queen d4, counterattacking my hanging queen. Alright, so if you take the queen, he can escape with the rook that way. So I take the queen, and he escapes with the rook that way. But look at this center. Just look at these pawns. My position is overwhelmingly unstoppable. um, so the only way, like all you need to do is find this pathway, this c4 square for your rooks, and trade off for his rooks, and you just have a winning endgame. And he can never stop this because he can never play a move like b3 to cover that square because the c pawn would be too weak. Um, Also, your plan is easy. You just double stack your rooks, and even if you don't put your rook here, you always have the minority attack plan, and you just win that way. So there's nothing white can do here. White has no plan. Just wait to lose. Okay, so she takes back with the rook, and oops, whoa, what the heck? And now I make this decision that, in hindsight, not my favorite. I jumped my knight into the center quickly because it visually looked strong, and it's not bad. It's just his bishop is terrible, right? Because you can never make this pawn push because it hangs the pawn, and his bishop has no good diagonals. So I don't want to trade it for this knight. So I should have moved my knight backwards, looking at this square and opening up for my rook. But whatever. In the game, I jumped it forwards. He should have just taken it and gotten rid of his bishop, probably. Doubled my pawns, traded a pair of rooks, maybe. But instead, she goes and tries to attack my queen side with a4. This makes some sense, but not a lot of sense, because I'm the one who should be playing on these three files, because this is where my rooks have easy access. Her rooks are going to take a while to go backwards and try to defend these. I also have targets I'm clearly aiming at, so you can't move the b pawn. But okay. I just go with my plan, and I throw a rook in here. And now this pressures the pawn. It also pressures the rook. And it gets ready to double my rooks. And then I have like this nice construction for my pieces. It's all moving in through this little thing. And so she just says, okay, well, my rook's defended. I'm just going to take your pawn. Fair enough. So here, you can take the pawn. You can take the rook. I take the pawn, which defends the rook. So now I still have this little bind on white's position with these pawns really clamping down on this fourth rank. And so I'm working with more space, right? I have nice pieces. And again, she should have taken my knight off the board, but um, yeah, this was really bad of me to leave this here, because if she takes it, you have to take with, let's say, the d pawn, because your rook would hang, and that gives his rook access to your position, and you just don't want to deal with that, like unnecessary. Definitely, this knight does not belong here, and belongs on the other circuit that we've mentioned. But she goes here, hitting the rook and the pawn. Again, another extremely cute move that just doesn't work though. So we take the rook so we don't lose time, right? Because she is threatening a pawn. So now she has to take back. And now we have options. Now this knight can move. Now this rook can move. And this pawn is hit. So what do we want to do? Well, counterattack. We're going to move this knight, because I now realize it never belongs there. And we move it here and hits the rook with tempo. So we're moving it for free. Of course, he's going to go here and hit your rook back for free. So you need to have an idea. You can't just have done this for no reason. My idea was that I relocate it to c4 for free. Now, why c4? Because that stops the attack. And if she takes, then I get to connect my pawn chain, and that looks super nice. Also notice that b3, right, to kick the knight, this pawn is hanging, and that's, you know, a nice central pawn for me, so I'll do that. So she pushes that pawn that was hanging. Now I can't, it's another cute move. It's like every single move she's making is super clever, because if you take this way, you hang the rook. If you take this way, she can take with the bishop, because you'll hang the rook. You can't take back. Having said that, you still can take once, and she can take once. You simply can't take back. But okay, so we traded pawns. Fine. It's not like she's threatening anything, so no big deal. So I figure in this position, you know, my knight's in a decent spot, blocking the file, protected by the pawn. My rook, I mean, I can move it, but my king is the piece that's in the worst spot. I only have 3 pieces on the board. I need to improve it the most. So I bring it just a little closer to the center, you know, because the end game is nearing. And so she moves. Oh, and simultaneously, not only does it improve my worst piece, but it sneakily comes with a threat. What? What's the threat? Well, it protects the rook, which means now the bishop is hanging, because this isn't protected. So that was my twofold idea. It looks like a passive move, but it actually threatens to win the bishop. Clever. So she moves the bishop, she sees it, and she threatens my pawn. It looks like, what am I doing, right? I'm going to squander my advantage. Maybe I will. Let's find out. I don't. I, for one turn, protect the pawn with the rook. Why? Because my knight still has pressure, and the position is in, like, she can't move. She can't push any of the pawns without losing them. So I have like all the time in the world to do what I want. Like I can protect this pawn, push it to wherever I want, reorganize my knight, then move my rook. And she can't really organize any defense. She has to bring this rook all the way around to do something. It takes a lot of time, so we'll see what happens. Okay, so she tries to counter strike with the pawn. It's a loose pawn, it's hanging, it's a weakness. You kind of want to get rid of it, so she tries this way. And the less pawns on the board, the less chance I have of queening one, so this is a good strategy for her. The downside, like, so if I take this pawn, then not so good. She'll take back. This pawn's hanging. I don't even know which one they take first. But either way, you lose support of this structure, which is super nice. If you push past, again, this pawn's hanging, and they have this construction you left, which is weird. But there is this nice move which I found, which is intermezzo 95. This threatens the bishop, And it just so happens the bishop like doesn't have anywhere to go. Um, so that's really annoying for them. And if you take the pawn or push the pawn, you hang the bishop. So I stopped, their threats with this move. It's a very clever move. Now I get to do one clever move of the game, and it does work. B3. I mean, I don't know what this move is. Oh, I see. I guess it was to quickly get the rook over to the A file. So now I do know what the move is, and she's like, I think she's a genius. All these moves she's playing are like amazing. It's unfortunate that they don't work, but super clever. I'd take this bishop because it's the only thing doing anything in my position. Like, it's the only piece that's putting pressure on me. So I take it and say, okay, now you have this pawn. I'm just going to win it. Easy does it. Attack the rook. This pawn can never move here to connect. So I figure I'm just going to win it and win the game. She defends. I say, okay, time to bring the king in, right? These are my only two pieces. They need to be as active as possible. She now comes up here, stopping the king's march and threatening the pawn. I push the pawn because it's funny. She brings her king in. Okay, that's fair. I played g4. It looks like a weird move, but it actually starts pushing these pawns now, which these pawns are going to be the ones that are going to queen, this pawn trio. It also opens up a square for my king to attack this pawn, and he cannot defend this pawn with his pawn because it can never go to g4 because I played it first. It's a weird move. You don't have to play g4. You can just go here and hunt the pawn. Yeah, that's the most like sensible approach. I would just tell you to go hunt the pawn. But whatever. I got a little fancy. I played g4. She moves her king in. And now I don't want her to like infiltrate any closer. So I played e5, shutting her out. And this gives my king another access, another avenue to the pawn. So she moves towards this pawn. I move towards this pawn. Alright, now I'm still up one pawn. The one that she blundered on turn 3. And she's just been resisting. Clever move after clever move. So now she does not take this pawn. Right? There's checks. There's tactics. Winning the rooks. Or pawns. Also, if she takes and we trade rooks, that's just easily winning for me. She goes here, but it's the same thing. She's trying to not lose this pawn, because if we just trade, it's a winning endgame for me. So she wants to hold on to this pawn, but it's still a winning endgame for me because of these guys. So I start pushing my pass pawn, I'm gonna create a pass pawn, and she tries to stop me, maybe, because if I push, she'll take here. That doesn't even work. I don't know. So I just push because it doesn't work. She takes, and now the only winning move is, well, let me ask you, do we take the pawn or do we push past? Little interactive lesson. Now you played 49 moves. You've struggled 49 moves to get to this point. And if you choose the wrong move, you go back to equality. It's the difference between triple zeros and -7. One of these is winning, and one of these just draws. Which one are you playing? Okay, I played the correct one. Now, what's the difference? The difference is if you look behind the pawns. Where do rooks like to be? Behind past pawns. Can't get to this square, can he? But he can get to this one. So he can't get behind the pawn. So he has to try to get in front of it. And that means you have no room. You're stuck. I just say, okay, I'm just gonna push these two pawns on their own. They're self-sufficient. They don't need. They hold each other's hands, and they don't need the king. So she gives me this check. Okay, I just move my king. Now she wants to kick my rook and queen herself. But the winning plan here is clear. You just promote to a queen. You sack your rook for the pawn. You have a queen. They have a rook. Now, if they try to sack their rook for your queen, it doesn't work because you have two pawns. So whenever they take the queen, you're gonna immediately make a new one. Whereas they don't have that luxury because they only have one pawn, and you're gonna take it. So I do not panic because his king is coming here. A lot of people would panic right now, and they would be like, "Wait, how do I stop this?" And they would, like, I don't know, bring their king back and move their. They would do something ridiculous. But we just push the pawns. King is here. Now we don't want them to just take the rook, although still winning, still winning. But we just push the pawn. Oh wait, I did do that. Never mind. Um, okay, yeah, still winning. So I do this because if he takes, I get a queen immediately. Way too slow, right? So instead, she does not do that. She moves in front. And now I just sack the rook. And once you have two pawns on the 6th rank, here, a rook cannot stop them. So they're worth at least a rook. The rook always will have to sack itself for one, and you'll still have the other one. So two pawns next to each other on the 6th rank are worth more than a rook. That's what you can remember from this, if anything else, if nothing else. So you can push your pawns, and it's not push your pawns, not here. Now you need to move your king up so he doesn't take. He comes here. Then I go in here and just secure it. Yeah, here you can kick the. Yeah, you can push the pawn, and when he takes, you get a queen. But then it's queen versus rook, and obviously winning. But why do that if you can move your king up and kick the rook, and then when you promote and he takes it, it's queen versus nothing, as opposed to queen versus rook. So that's the reason I don't push the pawn and I move my king, because I want to do queen versus nothing. So she just does whatever. We kick the rook, sack, queen, and I mean, and if you ever want like the easiest thing to do in any of these situations, no matter, let's say this pawn's even here, always just throw your queen on the queening square and you're done. They can never do anything. So I even sacked this queen as like a kind of a joke because I have another one. So I don't need to show you the rest. That was a pretty long game. Hopefully you learned something. Two pawns next to each other on the 6th, worth at least a rook. And go check out Ash Diana, check out her stream. She's got good music, and she has got lots of clever moves. Good luck in your chess. Goodbye.